Okay. Uh, Today, I'm going to talk about a subject that some people call the gamification of gaming. Okay. And I know that that's a semantic loop de loop. But what they're referring to particularly is gaming, is in video gaming, is obviously a product or service, like many others. And gamification itself refers to engaging the psychological reward centers of the brain in order to induce engagement by way of producing a sense of progression and accomplishment while usually profiting in some way off of that engagement. Okay. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Games, video games, role playing games, tabletop games, any kind of game does is obviously has that kind of reward engagement mechanism. Um, because you want to beat the other player or you want to progress through the story and beat it. And there is a psychological development process in video games specifically to encourage the player to continue playing to see the game through, to give them a sense of progression. And that is not necessarily a problem. However, what has happened in the last maybe 10, 15 years or so is that games have stopped being a product and have become a service. And in order to continually engage the player in that service, they produce a way that meshes the reward mechanism of a standard game, which is not an unhealthy process unless you become far too obsessed with a video game, in a way that can very easily become a very unhealthy thing that is more related to the financial transaction aspect of these services. Okay. Um, when I was probably, I want to say maybe 28 or 30 or so, there was a game that was very popular called World of Warcraft. Now, World of Warcraft is what's called a massively multiplayer online role playing game. Okay, what that means is that it follows the standard mechanisms of a role playing game format, in that you have hit points and you have magic and you have character classes and you fight monsters and find treasures and all of those other things that we're very familiar with any kind of game of its type. However, unlike other games that the company that made this, Blizzard, had made before, the game became a service rather than a product. Blizzard's earlier games, which had made them very popular, were games like Diablo, games like Warcraft, and StarCraft was another one, which followed a very similar thing. These were primarily single player games in that they had a campaign mechanic where you would start at an early level and progress through the game as it gained in difficulty, and it would expand different features and encourage you to continue to play the game using standard gamification methods. You have a progression, you feel a sense of accomplishment from winning the level, and you proceed on. um, Warcraft as a property originally was a top down what's called a real time strategy game. In this, you have units and such with these kind of hit point mechanics, but you create many of them, and the game's primary engine is about resource acquisition and management. So, in a simple explanation of a game of Warcraft, you have a big map, and it has things like forests, and it has mines, or mountains that represent minerals that you can mine, and other such things across the map. And each player, if you are in a multiplayer game, starts with a little town hall and a few units, one of which being a peasant. And the peasant can do things like build and cut down trees and so forth. They are not very good in combat. You really don't want to engage them in combat because their primary purpose is building and resource acquisition. Okay. One of the things that those peasants can build is a barracks, and that barracks can then produce units using the materials that you have obtained to create things like soldiers. And as you progress through the game, you get little upgrades, you add more advanced buildings, and you create more advanced units and stuff like that. And there's a whole strategy to securing parts of the map, and getting those minerals as fast as possible, that is balanced also with defending your territory. A What can very easily happen in a game like this is you're so focused on resource acquisition that your enemy has created a couple of units, not very many, but they can send them into your territory and wreak havoc on your town and maybe even win very early if they are aggressive in that way. So you have to balance this out in a whole variety of your own internal objectives and your own play style to try to defeat your enemies, and whoever is the last man standing wins. Now, at the end of the day, this does not take very long. You may sit down and it may be a very protracted battle that can happen, that can last for a couple of hours, but once the game is over, the game is over. It tells you how many points, what happened, everything else, and then you can review how you played, and talk with your friend about how you stomped them or how they crushed you or whatever, and that is the end of the game. And you can play on a different map, you can play with a different set of rules, that sort of thing. um, World of Warcraft was something different. You would create a character in this game, and you engage in what is called a persistent world. So this world existed and could be changed and manipulated in some fashion by the players as they played through the game. And other players would come into the same world and do the same thing. They'd fight monsters. They would acquire stuff. They would. I don't know all the mechanics of this game because I'd never played it for good reason. Um, but the larger, most important picture is that there's a series of progression that the player feels that they are engaging in this world and they're interacting with other players. And as you progress through the game, your character goes up in level and they look cooler, and there are rare items that you can put on and display, and that sort of thing, so that when you engage another player, you're able to see statistics about them, basically how powerful they are. And if they have a special piece of equipment, hey, that's a cool cape that you have on, right? That second aspect became part of the gamification of the World of Warcraft. Now, it was not the first multiplayer online game. I actually played the first multiplayer online game. It was called Ultima Online. I know it's very crude, and it was filled with opportunity for exploits. Let's put it simply. I'll A little story about that. Um, the series Ultima is predicated, actually, strangely enough, on an isekai concept. The main character, who is self-insert from or I wouldn't say the main character, the most powerful character in the game, is a self-insert of the developer of the game himself, who calls himself Lord British. Okay, and this is true of the original titles, which were originally single-player games on the computer, and then they got ported to console and such. But the guy who's the developer actually made this game. But players are very clever, especially when it comes to these kinds of things where you can affect a persistent world. And at one point early on in that game's existence, the developer, playing as his little character Lord British, showed up in a town at random to announce some new mission that he was going to send them out. He was the king of the country, whatever, but he would issue these missions to the players. Well, he did not have the foresight to think that another player would try to attack him. And so while he's giving his speech, his own character, this developer's character, was killed by another player who was standing in the crowd. He just decided to see what would happen if I cast Fireball on Lord British, expecting to die or whatever, some punishment that would come after him. But Lord British did not have his invincibility flag set. He did not have a sufficient amount of hit points or anything, because he was just using it as a mechanism to deliver a message, and he died and turned into a ghost, just like you do in the game. So games like this, as you can imagine, players being very clever and very persistent, will try to find ways to milk the most out of these environments. And Ultima Online was rife with these things. It's with a game like this, however, you have to balance the setup progression with the fact that not everyone can play all the time, right? If you are somebody who's living in your parents' basement and you have absolutely no life, you can play 16 hours a day. Trust me, I used to work at Xbox. I've seen players who do this. They're like, how are you sleeping? And they're good. They're exceptionally good, right? Um, so what they would do to balance that out is they introduced a concept called Power Hour. Now, this game, the way it worked was you could have up to a maximum of 700 percentage points over a variety of different skills that could be anything from combat, sword combat, and that sort of thing, to crafting things, right? And so, as you can imagine, it really depends. To go up in a skill, you would have to perform that skill, and in order to perform that skill, you have to have the potentially the raw material, right? If you're going to attack a monster, you have to have a sword. If you're going to cast a spell, you have to have the what they're called reagents. They're little bits of stuff that your character uses to cast the spell, that sort of thing. If you are crafting, you have to craft swords, and that takes iron ingots, which is expensive, right? So it was harder to get up certain skills, although you were more less likely to die crafting than you were fighting monsters. Uh, but first, in terms of progression, the first 70 or 80% were pretty easy to get. You could take any skill up to that level practicing, and it would go up very quickly. But it would begin a logarithmic scale in the difficulty and the amount of reward in order to continue to achieve perfection of 100%, right? Now, 100% didn't necessarily mean you were perfect at everything, but if you wanted to make the best armor that a player could make, you had to have 100% in your crafting skill, for example. If you had 100% in combat, it meant that you were going to do the most damage and hit the most often when swinging a sword on a monster, that depending on its difficulty, that's the best you could do. So, of course, the ultimate objective, even though you could have 14 skills at 50%, you're mediocre at all of them and not very good at anything. And specialization was key. And players would work and work and work to get 7 skills at 100% if they could, usually. And this took a long time. That progression was what engaged people in the game. And it was a subscription service. It cost $20 a month or something like that in order to play this game. So to achieve that perfection, you would need to continually log in and continue to play and fight monsters and all those other things. And it encouraged engagement in what I would think is a fairly healthy way for something of this nature. Uh, Also, what they introduced was something called Power Hour, which was the first hour of any time you logged in of any given day. That first hour was when you would be able to produce results from practicing your skills most frequently and with most benefit. And once that hour was over, you could still increase your skills, but it was far more difficult, right? So it helped level out a little bit the people who are more casual or just didn't have the time or had a job to actually keep up somewhat in this game. And of course, it still allowed people to who really wanted to spend those all hours of every day playing this game, that they would still be able to achieve something. For me, um, the problem was there was no real end game. You could own houses that were persistent. If you could build a house in the tile, you could build one if there was space available. And you could acquire items to decorate your house. That was pretty much it. That was all you could do. There was nothing really to do much with gold after a certain point in the game. Um, and to me, it turned into a Martha Stewart lifestyle. And once that little bit flipped in my brain, I was like, I don't want to play this game anymore. But me and my friends had played it for quite a bit because it's kind of fun to run around and fight dragons and everything else with your friends and go up in levels and all that other stuff together. And then other random people that you saw, and there was danger. Some players were player killers. You would wander through the forest, and there were some that would be hunting to just kill you for whatever reason. That was part of the game. It's kind of fun. Um, but the second major game like that came out was called EverQuest, and it had a much more aggressive progression system, and it had a guild system, meaning that people would partner up in what were called clans or guilds, and they would work together to achieve certain goals and missions that the game would dish out. That was the failure of Ultima Online. They didn't really have real actual mission. It was just a world you could explore, whereas EverQuest gave you quests, hence the name. The first part of the name kind of seemed obvious too. And people would engage in this unhealthy behavior because the logarithmic scale of progression also is coupled with the fact that there were rare items and such in the game that you could acquire that you could show off to other players. And there is a sense of social validation in these games when you're able to display a special item like that other people go, wow, cool, that's really neat. Or, hey, that special helmet that you have meant that you beat the boss in this particular special event or whatever. And some of it was super rare. It was an event that happened and no one else can get that special item anymore because that event is over. Sort of thing, that sort of thing. And stories started to crop up. Babies being malnourished because their parents weren't paying attention because they were playing this game so much. People losing jobs and stuff. It happened a lot. That actually happened a lot. People were so hooked into this game. I knew personally someone I worked with in the gaming industry, interestingly enough, who was playing this game all the time at work. I'm not her boss. I don't care. I was just a help desk guy, but it was noted by me every time I went by her, saw her desk. She had this game up and she was playing it all the time. I can't imagine that did much for her career. Not that we weren't all playing games in some capacity in that place. It was a game studio, actually, after all. But um, World of Warcraft took that element of progression to a very significant degree. Okay. Um, it was a huge world. The game was very colorful. It used a property that people were very familiar with, and it was very based on the rarity of rewards. It would offer titles to characters, and even change the color of the text over them if they achieved certain things. And it really became about acquisition of stuff and kind of a prestige model. Another thing that they did, though, and this is where things got really, what I think was where the problem lied, was they would create these missions, and these missions would have incredibly powerful bosses because the people who were developing these games knew that the players would band together to fight the monster, right? If you could get 20 people to fight the dragon in Ultima Online, for example, it was just quick work of that dragon. It didn't really have much of a chance because there were too many players attacking it. So they know that players would do this, so they would create these monsters that would be able to withstand certain players, a certain number of players. The other aspect of the game was that while there was specialization in other games, this one had character classes and followed a mechanic where each player would slip into a particular role, and they had to get skilled. They actually had to get very good at their role. So, for example, if you were a big dude with a shield, you would be a tank, and your job was to grab what was called the aggro, get the attention of the monster to come hit you because you could take the hits more than anybody else. And other people, because you're taking the hits, you can't really do much else besides engage with this monster. Other people would be responsible for giving you buffs that would protect you and healing you as you got hurt. You'd be relying on these other people to help you out. So you would have to be skilled at your job, but also be trusting the other player to take care of you because you can't do this on your own. That was part of the mechanic. And these guilds, these clans would get very, very large. And these missions would become extremely complicated and would take hours and hours and hours to play. Now, I had a friend, John. He was somebody I knew from the fourth grade. He was in the third. He was in my classroom in elementary school. And I knew him a little bit. He was somebody it's not a big class. And so I knew him quite a bit. But he was in a lower grade. And he was, even though we were in the same classroom, we didn't spend a whole lot of time together. Excuse me. Um, But I re-met him again when I was in middle school because he became friends with another friend of mine named Tom, who was also a gamer like me. And we became good buddies and we played lots of video games and role-playing games and all that other stuff together. He was my best friend back then. Um, when After I got married and had a child and stuff, I had to drop out of a bunch of these things. I didn't see my friends very often, but I did take the opportunity to see them from time to time and go to parties and other things like that. But I noticed after this game came out that John started to disappear off the map. Now remember, this was before iPhones. This was before there was email, of course, and text and cell phones and such. But being online and that sort of thing wasn't really quite a thing yet. And it was very often that you would go and knock on someone's door or give them a phone call. Email wasn't even really used for a communication like that unless you were sending them something important or whatever. Um, but I hadn't heard or seen from John in months. Now, people knew he was around. He hadn't completely disappeared and he was going to work. I could see, because I worked at Microsoft and so did he, I could see that there was activity from my friend. And every now and again, I'm some mail for at work and stuff. So he wasn't completely off the map. But anytime I'd reach out to him and say, "Hey, you want to hang out this weekend or whatever?" Oh, I can't. I'm busy, right? And really, what was happening was that he was engaged in these clans in World of Warcraft, and he was playing this game so much because of this social validation aspect that it became probably the most important thing in his life. In fact, I would certainly say, actually, that it was the most important thing in his life in that particular point in time. Now, this is not a character judgment. This is talking about the gamification aspect. Now, what had happened is that he had become a guild leader. He had become a person of importance in this community. And he had all sorts of special items and special titles and all of these other things. He was somebody important in this game. And this is the trap that these games began to engage in back then, in those days, was that a lot of people who are marginalized in society, in the what we would call the meat space, to use a cyberpunk term, uh, could actually use their skills, use their gaming skills, to actually achieve a level of prestige that is nothing like that is in their real life. Now, this is actually a very science fiction concept. In the game, in the book Snow Crash, which was written by Neil Stephenson in 1996, I think, it's a kind of a Blade Runner type story where the main character lives in a storage unit and he's kind of a slob. But when he plugs his head into the grid or whatever it was called in that particular book, he is somebody powerful and special, and he spends most of his time in this world because that is his world. He neglects himself, he neglects everything around him in order to because that is not no longer important. His life in this spirit, almost a spiritual world, a different world, is far more important, and he is more important in that world. And John, because he was a leader of his particular clan, was responsible. He felt a sense of responsibility, and rightly so, because these raids, which would engage 30 or 40 players at a time, many people, you'd have to corral these people, and you'd have to encourage them, and you would have to tell them what their roles are and teach them and all these other things. Um, and on the flip side, if you were not skilled, if you couldn't hold your own in a game because you were not skilled, didn't know how to play, you were too casual, whatever, you would not be able to participate in these raids. Okay, so there's a social pecking order that's happening here too. Okay, he was at the top. He wanted to be at the top, but it took all of his spare time, all of it, and then some, I'm sure. But I did not know this at the time. I just knew that my friend had disappeared off the map for many months. So finally, I happened to be in the neighborhood of where he lived, and he had moved fairly recently, but I knew where he lived. So I just decided to go knock on his door and see if he was home. So I knock on the door, and he answers, and he looks like hell. He hasn't shaved for however long. He's in a state of disheveled dress, and he's surprised to see me. And I'm like, "Hey, what's up, man? It's been a while. Hey, what's going on? Can I go in?" And he looks back and he looks at me and he looks back and he's like, "Oh, okay," right? And he lets me in. Well, I had lived with John a number of years before, and John was a slob. I'm just gonna say it. I'm sorry, John, if you ever watch this, man, you were a messy character, okay? And no, that should not come as a surprise. But um, his stuff was mostly cluttered. That's really what I would say. He was not. That was a just a thing that we'd have to deal with him about when I was living with him. But it wasn't really something that was concerning. It was more like get your stuff together. But when I came into his apartment, I was stunned. He had dishes piled up in the sink. The sink was completely unusable, up as high as the faucet, and they were old. They had been there for a while. His dresser, when I say his dresser, it was his dryer because his dryer was his dresser. His clothes were in a state of being like kind of half pulled out. Junk everywhere of various states. He had moved into this apartment months and months before, but there were no decorations in this place. He had a handful of things that were like couch and chair that were all covered in stuff, that you couldn't sit in this place. And his bedroom was a mattress on the ground without even a sheet on it. It was just a blanket. and a pillow. But his office, he had lived in a 2 bedroom apartment that he was running for himself, and he worked at Microsoft. He had the income to support this. His office was amazing. He had a beautiful, huge monitor. I'd never seen anything like it, and it curved in. So it was this almost panoramic view. You could just sit forward and just immerse yourself. Your peripheral vision would get affected by these. These were new, and they don't do that anymore because they were dumb. But whatever. Um, and an incredibly high end PC that he had assembled, and he had rear Sony whatever that is, Dolby rear projection speakers suspended from the ceiling, installed with poles that were situated such that when you're playing this game, you would have the rear surround sound experience. It was a complete quadraphonic audio experience that he configured, and he had an amazing setup. And behind him, in a webcam kind of way, he had a bookshelf in very un-John like fashion. All of this stuff was well arranged of various role playing and gaming memorabilia, all arranged very well organized, to display his, I would say, uh, his credentials, his chops as a gamer. Okay. Now, out of view of the camera, though, there was all sorts of cans and other food things where he had been there, and I mean, short of a bedpan, he could have basically. I don't think he had that, but but the only reason that he would need to leave is to try to engage in this. But he was neglecting everything else in this place, and he knew me well enough, and that's why he had pause when I came in. Is he knew that I would see this and immediately start doing something about it. Okay, this is not a character judgment anymore. This is something that has to be taken care of, and it has to be taken care of now. It's the first thing I thought. We can't have this, John. We can't. You know, you know. So we're gonna take care of it. So the first thing I said, oh my gosh, okay, no, 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 I'm not gonna allow this. I can't abide it. I can't. And of course, he's very sheepish about this. He's ashamed about it, and I'm not riding on him. But he understands that somebody is now seeing him in this state, and it's revealed the truth about him, that whatever he is in this game, and to these people in this game, he is not in real life. So I immediately set about grabbing all the trash and some, just like 6 or 8 bags, giant trash bags of just junk that ended up filling up, taking it out to the dumpster. And, we're talking and stuff, and he kind of engages because he knows I'm just being cool with him and being a friend. And do all of his dishes, get that all squared away, get all the junk off the chairs and stuff. I didn't finish everything. I didn't fold his laundry or anything like that, but got him out of a state of like, because it's one of those things where once the mountain gets so high, it feels like such an unaccomplishable task. And this is something I know about myself too. It's that it's too much, right? You just, it's very easy to turn away from it rather than start eating the elephant of the problem, right? And I didn't see it that way. It's like, we got to eat this elephant, man. This elephant's got to get put in our belly. You know what I mean? So get all that stuff taken care of. And of course, he shows me his video game, what he's spending all of his time on. And I saw it. It was very pretty. It was very pretty. And I looked at it and I said, oh, I better not play this game. I better not. Because not only had I been warned, but I could feel it. I can feel it right away. I could get drawn right into this thing. Because that kind of gamification is social gamification. And I realized this later, many, many years later, actually not very long ago, when I was invited to play League of Legends. And I didn't quite understand what I was getting into. At first, we were playing this game where it was just a collaborative game where you're fighting against a team of other people with the same kind of, you choose a character, and there is a special way to play this game. Don't get me wrong, there is a learning curve to this game. You can't just walk in. You have to have other people telling you how to play this game. There's no way you're not going to you're gonna stumble along for days trying to figure the basics of this game out. It's wild, League of Legends. But anyway, I just go along and I'm playing with them, and there was a turning point, maybe 3 or 4 times, 4 or 5 times after we played it, where I felt the rest of the team start to click. And it stopped being a game about just hanging out and talking and, oh, there's a monster over here or whatever. They're talking about what is happening on the map in a way that I am not understanding. I'm not processing. I'm just, playing my werewolf and I'm a monster, rar. And they're like, there's a tech, blah blah blah. There's a dude coming down the middle, lane, blah, the coming through the edge, and then watch out for and they're talking about my own area that I'm supposed to defend because I'm not doing a good job, and they're trying to accommodate for the fact that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to because I'm busy just playing the game as a monster, rar. And I backed out of that game that night, and I sat there and I thought, I'm not keeping up. This is a game for younger people. And I'm going to have to, my skills, I'm going to have to get better at this game. I have to play this. I have to practice. I was looking at it in terms of a production mode mentality. And if I don't, because I'd already kind of warned them, like, I'm not very good at this stuff anyway, and I don't want to drag the team down. And they originally were like, no, don't worry about that. We're just doing it to have fun. But I realized I hit this breaking point where I was starting to stress out. And the reason why is because I wanted to participate. I wanted to hang out with these people, but I didn't want to be dragging the team down. So in order to not drag the team down, I have to practice. Now, League of Legends, you have to understand, there are professional people who play this game. I watched years ago a tournament with a multi-million-dollar pot for the team of 5 or 6 or whatever it is to take home with them. This is bigger than a pot in golf. This has turned into a professional sport. I know somebody who stays up till like 3 or 4 in the morning to watch the games in Korea for her favorite team. This is a big deal. Gaming has changed, I learned. But I ended up contacting those people. And I talked about this in another video. I contacted those people and I said, they invited me to this game. And I was like, I'm sorry, guys. You got to understand, I can't keep up in this game. I just, it's stressing me out. It's making me feel miserable because I'd had the epiphany, like, you have to do this. You have to do this. No, you don't. It was like a light that came on into my skull. You don't have to do that. You don't. You really don't. It felt sad about it because it's like I had to tell everybody I'm bowing out. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. But I was saying goodbye to them. I didn't even really realize that's what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. I was saying, I have to let you go, my friends. Have fun playing this game. So long. Now, millennials are awesome about this stuff because those guys were like, oh, no, you're not. You're not leaving us. We're just going to create a new environment that has nothing to do with this game. You're going to continue hanging out and conversing with us. You're just not going to talk about the game in this channel. I was like, you're accommodating for my disability here, but he's like, yeah, that's how we do. Okay. But it's the same issue that his responsibilities in this as a master of this clan took so much of his energy, so much of his time. 8 hours a day on these games. He was barely getting any sleep. And he was using up all his weekends and stuff to maintain his status as the master of this guild. And so when I was there, I very lightly pointed it out to him. I said, well, I'm glad you like this game, John. I do, but I think it's taken a lot more of your time than I think you might realize, and it's hurting you in other ways. I don't want to see you live like this. And I'm sure you don't want to live like this. You got to pay attention to what's happening in the meat space because you're neglecting it. That was the last I saw of him for like 2 years. He was the master of his domain in this game. He worked at Microsoft, probably not putting in his best work, I'm sure. He got along, of course. But I didn't talk to him. And most people hadn't seen him for a long time. We lost our friend to World of Warcraft. And what broke him out of his reverie was this. There was a girl, as it always tends to be, a girl he met and was part of his clan and was engaged in this game as much as he was. And he became good friends with her and started to develop romantic attachments to this person in another state, on another screen. I don't know if they video shared or whatever. I have no idea how that worked out. I did not get all the details. I only got peripheral stuff. But what I do know is this. Eventually, John decided to go out to visit her. And he and Jason, another friend of mine, who we also had been role playing, roommates, and also role playing buddies as well, uh, they decided to go on a trip, a cross country road trip together. And Jason had his own objective. I don't remember what it was. It's maybe to visit somebody. I don't know. I don't, that wasn't my business. I didn't dig into it because when they came back, they were very surly, both with each other and how things had gone on their adventure. What happened to John, though, was he finally went out to visit this person. He went out to visit this person who has been developing a romantic attachment to, had known for, I guess, a year, 2 years or something. Finally met them in person. And she was a minor, a disabled minor. And her father answered the door. Who are you? John was like 30 or 28 or whatever. And it shocked him back into reality. He didn't even visit her. He knew she was there, I guess. Or maybe he met her through the door or whatever. But of course, her father's like, excuse me, and, whoa, I did not know. But it was not only a shot across the bow, that he could really get into trouble, but also, too, that he had developed a fantasy world. He was living in this fantasy world, and that other person was also living in this fantasy world. And the people that were engaging with each other in this fantasy world were not anything like they were in the real world. I'm sure she probably, if she saw John, she probably didn't think of him as the 6'5" captain, master, marshal, whatever the hell he was. He was just a dude. And he stopped playing World of Warcraft, and we got a friend back. You know. Now the cool thing about guys like us, we're like, "Welcome back, John. Let me tell you about what's been happening. We aren't surly with him. We're not judging him. And we're just glad to have our friend back. And it happened to me too. It's happened to me. Girls and stuff like that, they get in the way, and then when you get back together as friends, you just, God, it's good to see you again." Facebook performs a similar function. Any of these multimedia or social media applications kind of perform a similar function. They get in between you and the other person and allow you to project images at each other that probably aren't the reality most of the time. That is one example of gamification. But people started to get wise to this about World of Warcraft because they would keep adding expansions that you would have to pay for if you wanted to play the new thing, and keep paying the $20 a month. And there was all this, significant progression that you had to go up to achieve even the most minor results with if you were a veteran player. And people started to burn out, and it eventually died more or less on the vine. It just lived out its life. But they made a lot of money, and they taught people in the gaming industry a certain fact: services pay. We are not selling products anymore. Because in the old days, especially the old days, you'd sell a cartridge. The game was on this, and you plugged it in, and that's what it was, and that's what it worked. There were no patches, there were no bug fixes, none of that other stuff. That was the game. If the game was broken when you shipped it, it was broken when the customer got it, and there was nothing they could do. In my time, when I first started in the gaming industry, the internet was not quite ubiquitous. Most people had modems. Some people were not connected online at all. Almost all software was bought on CD-ROM or whatever. Very little digital distribution because you couldn't trust it because of piracy. And if you patched something, that had to be a simple patch that could be downloaded over a modem, or it was maybe deployed as part of what's called an expansion pack that would add to the game. You could do that by selling another CD or whatever. And very few of us had a broadband connection. And if you didn't have internet connection at all and you needed a patch and you called us up for customer support, we'd have to mail it to you. As things became more advanced in internet technology, broadband became pretty standard. Cable modems became something most people, who, especially people who were interested in video games and other stuff like that, would have. So you could deploy patches as well as maintain online systems that retained user base. I worked at Xbox in 2002 when Xbox Live launched. I was part of the operations team there. And that was the first of its kind because the Xbox, for its many flaws or whatever, that network was very secure and you could prevent cheating. And people took that very seriously because you could actually play this game and trust that the entire environment was sanitized from people having hacked versions of the game that just made it miserable for everyone. And it was there that I saw the true depravity of what a player looks like. We had one player, we weren't even sure if he was cheating because he was doing so well, and he was literally up like 20 hours a day, and he was top of the leaderboard in a game called MechWarrior. We were watching this guy, and he was killing. So the game was basically you're fighting tanks with legs. Is basically how you can think of it, and usually it would take you 2 or 3 minutes to wear another opponent down. He was doing it on an average of something like 30 seconds. He was exceptional at this game. So finally, because we're not sure if he's cheating at this game, we had special logins on the network, and you all knew who we were by our special tag XOC, Xbox Operations Center. And 5 of us dropped into this game on him at once. And he saw us. It was funny. It was really funny because we all are in a team, and we all have this very conspicuous name. I'm Zoc Brandor, and there's Zoc Jamels, and all these other guys, all in our weird little mechs. And we're standing off. This guy turns and looks at us, and he doesn't do anything. He's like, "Who the hell are these guys?" And my boss, he takes the weakest weapon he has, a machine gun, fires one bullet at this dude, just to let him know we're here to mess with you. And he's like, "It's on." And he took all 5 of us out. He was so good. I was wiped almost instantly. I didn't know how to play this game at all, and he cooked me so quick. I couldn't believe it, but it was legit. He knew what he was doing. He was just really good at this game. People are amazing at video games. My friend Tom was the best I ever saw. And people look for exploits, and they're looking for holes and all these other things. They're trying to get as most out of the system as they can. Um, but these online systems, these online environments allowed for persistent play more frequently. Even if it's called hosting. So if some games, if they're multiplayer, say like Halo, what would happen is the game would fire up and it would choose one of the boxes that are playing as the one that runs the whole system, and everybody is essentially connecting to that, and it's handling all of the multiplayer stuff. Can't have that in a massive multiplayer online game. You distribute some of the work to the clients, but most of that is handled in these servers. Um, and the servers and the persistent leaderboards and all that stuff started to become a very common thing in gaming in general. And online gaming became much more common. It became almost a requirement of any game that come out. After a while, you had to have an online component or people wouldn't buy it. It's strangely enough, I like single player games, but they started to fall by the wayside for 2 reasons. One is because the product was complete. So if you sell the game for $50 and I play that game, that's the amount of money you're getting from me. Whereas if it's a subscription service of some sort, you can continue to get money from me as long as I continue to play it. And that's what they want. They want you to continue playing it so that they can keep getting money for the same software. So while not every game had any subscription service, they all participated for the most part in the Xbox Live service or the PlayStation Network or some other multiplayer environment if you didn't want cheaters that did cost the players money, and they get a little cut of that, right? If your game was really popular on Xbox, you'd get some money from Microsoft for that game. Um, so you also had the massive multiplayer online games. There was a whole bunch of them that of varying quality that usually cost 10 or $20 per month to play, and it followed similar to World of Warcraft's model, just maybe not as good or whatever. And, I didn't play any of those either. I didn't have the time. I played Dungeons and Dragons online. Boy, it's a theme with me, isn't it? Um, that one actually had a thing because it was for people like me that were older that wanted to play these games and liked to cooperate, but you couldn't sink that much time into it. And even then, it still had a progressive level system that was like, I'm not going to play this game past level 7. It takes too long, to go up any kind of level. But nevertheless, what it would do is you jump into a mission. It would say this is going to take about an hour. Then it'll take about half an hour. So you don't have to spend 8 hours playing this game, And the 4 people that you're with is just 4 people. You don't have to rely on them at all. I mean, you do, but just on a little bit adventure, whatever. But I didn't play that for terribly long because there was another single player game that was much more satisfying using the Dungeons and Dragons rule set. Called Neverwinter Nights. Boy, oh boy. Anyway, um, but later you started to see games like Candy Crush, which was massively successful, that started to use what were called microtransactions. And those come in a couple different flavors. But I'm going to first talk about a social experiment that somebody ran, I want to say in about 2007, 2008. That was when it was around the time of the primaries, the Democratic primaries. This is why I remember this, because this was another subject that was coming up in my field. There was a game that was out on Facebook called Cow Clicker. And the game was this: you had a cow, you could click on it, and it would move. And that was it. That was all. You could pay a little money so you could click on it again so it would move again. Now, this sounds asinine. It sounds so stupid. This game made money, man. It made a lot of money. And he started doing crazy experiments. This was made by a psychology, I think it was for his thesis. He was on his way to become a doctor. And he made this game that all it did, all it did was moo at you. You could buy skins, what are basically graphical overlays, so that would change the appearance of your cow. So you could get a spotted cow that would cost you $1 or something. People were buying this stuff. They were buying entire catalogs of cow skins. So he went above and beyond and offered the golden calf. The golden calf cost $100. He sold quite a few of those. Now, what nobody knew, and this was fine, but we only found this out after the whole project was over. This guy was he wanted to see how far he could push this thing, you know? Oh my god, it makes me laugh so much when I think about this. So so finally he's making a killing. He donated all this money to charity at their whatever, you know. It was actually pretty funny. I mean, he was pretty cool about it. All said and done, he could have just walked away and been the cow clicker dude that just was a millionaire. He gave it away, but what he did at the end was like, I got to wrap this experiment up. This is out of control because people were paying so much money to make their cow click. They wanted to click that cow and change the skin and click and moo moo moo. And he kept adding these features to it that people would pay for. Finally, he says, all right, here's the deal. It's the cowpocalypse. And he said, cow clicker is coming to an end. And your cow's going to die in a week. Okay? But you can pay $10 something to let him live another half of a week. But the amount of, every time you pay $10, it cuts that number in half. And, you know, it's, all you have to do is look at that math and know this cow's days are numbered. Okay, but I think I don't remember exact time frame, but it was basically like you got a week, you could extend it to a month. And oh my god, so many people paid so much money to prevent their cow from dying. Until finally it was like you could not actually pay and have the transaction for your credit card go through fast enough before the time would run out. And finally cow clicker died, man. But he wrote this whole thing about that where he's like, this is horrifying. People are such cows. They'll just keep paying money for this stuff. It was incredible, and people were so sad about it. They were so upset. They were so upset that their cows were gone. Okay, but we learned a lot about human psychology from that particular experiment. You know, this stuff is dangerous, man. It really is. It really gets into people's heads. And the guys at Candy Crush knew this. They knew it. And what they'd do is they would let you play for a little while. And a lot of games came out, especially on mobile, that came out that were like this. That you could play for a while, but playing would cost you some currency, some in-game currency, gems or something. Okay. And you could buy more gems. So you play the game for a while and you would die. You know, it's like Tetris or something. That's another game I didn't really get into. But you'd play for a while and you would lose. And to play again, you'd have to deposit more gems, okay? And you got a certain amount of gems every day or something. It had a counter that would give you those things. And at first you look at it and you think, okay, this is the way they can meter service, so it's not overloading the system. You know, people who play, they, you know, eventually they run out after a while, and then they have to wait until they can play a little longer. But this game was so addictive, like Tetris is. Okay, now Tetris didn't charge you per money. Tetris today, that would have been a killer in terms of revenue today. Tetris would be for the same reason, because there was people were playing this game and they would use this in-game currency, and you would get some as part of your daily thing, and there were little rewards you would get. You hit achievements and you would get some of this in-game currency, but at the end of the day you would run out, especially if you weren't good. You know, there were certain achievements you would, you know, get a billion points in one session or whatever it was, and get 50 of these gems, whatever. You could buy more. You could buy more gems or whatever they were. I don't remember. But you buy more of this in-game currency, and it would be tacked onto your phone bill. Okay, I want to play some more. It's $1 or $5 or whatever it is to reload a bunch of gems, and I could play for the next 3 hours or 8 hours or whatever it was. So they'd charge $5. That's okay, no big deal. A micro transaction, and now I can play some more. But the progression of how much of these gems you could get on your own would rapidly decline, and you would get to a point in these games where the daily allotment they gave you was like an hour or 15 minutes or something, not very much, whatever it was. People love to play this game. Oh, boy, they love to play this game. It wasn't very much. And so they would pay money so that they could continue to play this game, $5 at a time or whatever it was. And it's invisible because it was being billed to your phone bill. Phone companies stopped doing that for the very obvious reason that people would get thousands of dollars in phone bills. I had a friend of mine that was telling me that his kid, this is another issue, was playing this game. He had no idea. And this kid would just, he didn't know, he'd just keep buying these gems so that he could continue playing, not knowing it was going to rack up an $8,000 phone bill. That's what it was. And parents would call into the phone company, I'm not paying this. You didn't gate this from a 12-year-old. You know, he had no idea what he was doing. He just, well, you selected the terms of certain. No, he doesn't have the right to consent. They had to come up with laws, and eventually the phone companies were like, you can't handle billing through us anymore because we're tired of getting screwed by this. And so that's how you end up with the iPhone Apple Wallet, so that you did have a link into your credit card, but at least it had some validation. You had to load that card into your phone, and you had to use some sort of validation to let them know you're paying for this. But one of the ways that would obscure the actual value of these gems too is they were disconnected from any kind of currency valuation you would normally think of, and also in increments that aren't ways that brains think for the most part. The industry in general has settled on 160 as a unit of denomination because it's so odd. It's kind of binary, 16, but it's still it's digital number. But if you say 160 gems are $1, you can't really convert how much a gem is into currency, and vice versa. So if I have 8,000 gems to spend, which is, I don't know, $50. I think that's what it works out to in that particular environment. 60, I don't know. That's it. It's hard to convert. And they do it on purpose. So they use these weird increments that you disconnect from actual currency value that you work with. And this is true in every culture. 160, that's why they settled on it, is because it doesn't work in pesos, it doesn't work in yen, it doesn't, well, right now it does, but it doesn't work in dollars, anything like that, for somebody to look at and say, okay, this is how many dollars this thing costs. And of course, you get some of this in the game. There are achievements and chests and whatever the games are that you can get these gems or whatever. So they feel free. You get a bunch of them up front when you first start playing the game, when it's free. You don't pay to buy these, to play these games. They just have this in-game currency. My first experience with this was called Genshin Impact. My daughter was very keen on me playing this game. She showed it to me once, and then eventually I got into playing it. I did not pay any money for this game, okay, for the first year that I played it. And I never got too crazy with it because that kind of part of my brain doesn't really get tickled. I'll pay for something I think is fair value. I don't mind paying money for video games, but I'm not going to pay crazy amounts. But the model of gaming that I've been used to for the 2010s was like what Paradox does. So Paradox creates the games Crusader Kings 2, Crusader Kings 3. uh, what was the other one? Heart of Iron. There's Victoria something. Victoria 2, I think. Like all these historical simulators. You know, I love it. They also make a game called Stellaris, which is kind of a sci-fi game, which I really like. Crusader Kings and Stellaris are my two games that I like to play. And they would have the base game, and you could play that. You could buy that for $10 or whatever, very cheap. But then as the years went on, they would update the base engine of the game, and you could buy expansion packs for $20 or $30. And the problem really was that they didn't really give a lot of discounts. The Sims was one of these that did this, that never offered discounts, and it was they would offer, Halloween pack or whatever. If you bought the whole catalog of the Sims game, which a lot of people were into as a single player game, but they keep releasing these DLCs that were essentially just additional assets. You get a jack o' lantern and a costume or whatever. That's $10 or $20, and if you bought all of it, it's like $7,000 or something like that. So you had to be selective, right? But at least you're selective. And the same with this game was you could these games you could buy the expansions that they would release every 6 months or a year or whatever, and it would add features to the game if you paid for that. Um, that would make the game a little different, a little better. And but over time, over the years, for a game like Stellaris, I ended up paying about $300. I don't mind that. I don't, because every time I download a new update, there was new stuff to do. The engine of the game would change. It would become some almost a completely different game. It was a lot of familiarity, but something different, right? But that is predicated on them releasing content. Genshin Impact was something different. The game was completely free, and every 6 weeks or so, they would release something new. And some of this stuff was pretty incredible. In particular, what really caught my attention with this game was very early into its release cycle, it came out with an area called Dragonspine, which was kind of like, you can imagine, like the Matterhorn. This game was like the Legend of Zelda. It was this very big adventure fantasy world that had a lot of mysterious lore and all this other stuff, and lots of chests and everything else that you could get. And you'd pick up characters that would come join you and all these other things. You'd have a party of four and you'd run around and you'd mix up how you did combat with these guys, whatever. There's a whole system, and you get equipment and like all that, just like you would with any other game, like, of its nature. But I was playing in Dragonspine, and Dragonspine was ruthlessly hard. It was really hard. And people didn't like it, interestingly enough. They did not like this because they were playing it because it's an anime game. And so they were liking it for the pretty girls and the kind of fun aspects. And this was a real challenge. And a lot of them like, I don't want to be challenged. I want to see the pretty girls and, go on dates or whatever. There's all these things that you can do in this game. It's wild how big of a brush that they paint with this particular game. But me, I like these challenges. I like these environments. And Dragonspine had an element where, like, you can't be away from the fire for too long or you start getting cold. So you would dodge from one campfire to the next because getting cold would cause you damage. And then you'd be running into the mountain inside these ice caves and fighting, giant Sasquatches and, dragon like creatures, and finding ruins and ancient artifacts, these swords and stuff. It was amazing. It was such an incredible level. When I think of game design and I think of level design, Dragonspine is one of the top on my list. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. And finally, you get up to the top of this thing, and you find that this ancient civilization that had been ruined and whatever, and you activate this pillar and you climb up to the top. And when you do this, you finally conquered the level. You've finally done it, and it gives you this visual reward that you never really see again. When you come back there, you don't get this reward. I really wish they would have left it in there for you, but that's what makes it special. Is an aurora borealis effect, and I had a good video card, and it was amazing. It was such an amazing thing to stand on top of this mountain. I have conquered it, and all this visual, reward that you're receiving, and you're looking around the landscape. And you're like, I have done this, and it was really fun. And I thought at that time, at that very moment, I thought, I have not paid a dime for this game, and it's one of the best experiences I've had. There's another section in the game where you are climbing through this you have to find this tunnel, and you're going through, and it's just a nightmare tunnel. And you finally reach the end of this thing, and you discover an underground city with an artificial sun. And you come out of that door and you look off and you see this bright glowing thing over a city, and you're in a cave, and you're like, wow, an ancient forgotten city with an artificial sun. How about that? And again, I didn't pay a dime at that point when I saw it. It was an incredible experience. I really loved it. And I thought about it, like, how are they doing this? How are they giving you something so incredible that you just download for free, that they keep adding stuff and updating? Well, I'll tell you how. Part of the game is what's called a gotcha mechanic. I'm surprised they didn't change that name in English. It's a Japanese word that relates to the gambling that happens in a pachinko parlor in Japan. And it's basically the same thing as one armed bandit. Okay? Which gets us into the other aspect. In Vegas, they call it gaming. Really, what it is games of chance that are gambling, right? But specifically, when you're talking about the one armed bandit mechanic, uh, those are called slot machines. But we call it, that's a colloquialism because it steals your money. But a slot machine, just for simple explanation, has three spinners and a bunch of different pictures on it. And if you align all three, just by random chance, if all three align to the same picture, you get money come out of the machine. But so if you get the three gold bars, you get a whole bunch of money that would come spilling out of the machine. In the old days, it comes out in tickets and all this other stuff now. But you would put a quarter in and hope more quarters came out. That's basically what it was. But of course, very, very infrequently would you get more quarters come out. But the modern slot machines, if you've ever been to a casino, oh my God, so much visual, haptic, audio feedback on these big screens that stretch up. And it's just random chance. But there's so much reward triggering to your reward dopamine reaction that people sit in front of these machines for hours at a time. Hours at a time. There's an internet video out of like this whole line of old people. It's like Social Security checks came in this month, and they're just pressing this button. Pressing this button. All of them are. And one's, if you've heard of it, one's immediately reminded of that experiment. I don't know when it was done, where they're giving cocaine to a rat if he pressed the button. And by the end of the experiment, of course, he's just, whether there was cocaine coming out of there or not, or if he was getting shocked, cocaine's a hell of a drug, as they say. But that's what you're looking at, right? That's what's happening. They are trying to get their dopamine activated because they've figured out through this psychological experimentation, that's how you get them to continue paying money into these machines, right? Well, in a similar fashion, games that are called gotcha games, again, it's a great word in English for what it is, you get all sorts of this in-game currency. But instead of paying for time to play, what they do is they have these new characters that have special abilities, and they look cool or pretty or are awesome or whatever they are. They have some sort of mechanic. And the anime scene, don't get me wrong, I like a pretty anime girl. I do. I like a cool anime guy. But some people are pretty wild in their tastes of what they like and this stuff. And they appeal to a broad array of these people with some of these characters. But it's all in good taste. It's a PG-13 type game. I wouldn't even say PG-13. I would argue it's PG. But there's this new character, and it's brand new. And she's cool, or he's cool. I want that character. Well, the way you get that character is you have to engage in a slot machine type mechanic. So with your in-game currency, and other ways to get it, you get tokens, so to speak, that there's no relationship, more or less, between what one of these tokens is worth versus what it's worth in a dollar. You can buy more with this in-game currency. You can buy more in-game currency with a dollar, but it's very hard to determine how many pulls or how much money each pull is worth. Okay. Now, of course, that is also muddied by the fact that when you buy in-game currency, they give you a bonus for your first purchase for each of the dollar increments that they will sell you. And those increments, of course, the more money you spend, the better ratio you get, right? And there's other ways to get this stuff. It's very obscure for you to be able to say, how much money am I putting into this machine for every time I pull it? But in any case, you can imagine like a like one of those old quarter operated vending machines with a little ball to the toy inside. Okay. And there's inside this machine, let's just say, for the sake of argument, there are 90 balls, and two of them are gold. And inside one of them, you know this much, inside one of them is that special new character. But inside the other is one of seven of these, what they call the standard banner characters, who are good, but they're not as good as this person. And you can get these guys in other ways as well. They're not as valuable. And then also inside here, you also have purple balls, maybe nine of them, that inside of them they have pretty good characters. They're decent characters. There's a lot more of them in here though, or decent items, whatever they are. And then the rest is all basically junk. Like you can use them. There might be use cases where you use them early and mid game, but you're not going to use them for the most part. They're just junk. They have these machines in a place like Urban District Market in Noda. Actually, you can go see machines that do this, where there's a character on these vending machines, and it's a special character, and it's the one that they advertise. And then there's some decent characters, and then a bunch of junk characters that you don't want. And it's the same kind of operation. There's one in here that's like this, and the rest are garbage. Well, if you really, really want that special character, you have to pull the one-armed bandit a certain number of times. Now you can luck out with your 1 in 200 chance that you're going to get the golden ball on your first pull. That could happen. That does happen. It's happened to me a couple times playing these games. But most of the time, it's usually 60 or 70, because that's how probability works, where one of these golden balls will pop out. If you get the one that has the standard character, that's called losing your 50-50, is what they call that. You're like, ah. And what happens is they fill the machine back up. But what they do for you is they don't put another one of those back in the machine. Now there's only one golden ball in there. Then you know that that has the special character in there. So you keep pulling, because this time I'm guaranteed. And then whenever you get that special character out, however many pulls it takes, and all the other characters and items you get, when that happens, they refill the machine and put two balls in there again. And these banners, what they're called banners, that show what the special character is, the flavor of the month, basically switch out every 6 weeks for this particular game I'm thinking about, for Genshin Impact, and true of any of their other games for the most part. And then that character is not available to you anymore. It'll come back around at some point, maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year. You have no idea what their schedule is. In the meantime, they're going to introduce a new character to you who's a little bit cooler or a little bit different or whatever. Now, of course, everybody has their flavors. Some characters they like, some others they don't. I'm the same way. There are certain characters I like, others I'm like, I don't care. But the thing is it's feeding on, there are a couple of things that are happening there. The first is there are completionists, people who want every character. They don't care necessarily if they have the best of everything, but they just want to be complete with their roster. Understandable. But if you don't get lucky with your in-game resources they give you, and it's just not quite enough, really, from a probability perspective, it's not going to be enough for what they give you for free. You're going to have to pay money in a couple of different ways. One of the ways they do it is you pay $5, and every day you log in, we'll give you a little extra of that game currency. Okay, it's not actually a bad deal. If you're okay with spending money on games, it's not a bad deal. Right? But they give you some of that other in-game currency too. They show you, and there are other things you can buy with that in-game currency that you can't get any other way. So that's another way they get you to spend money. You get a little bit of this. Hey, if you do this for 4 or 5 months, you can buy one of the special outfits for the girls. Oh yes. It's swimsuit time, baby, whatever. But so those are only available if you actually pay money. Okay, so that's one way or the other. And then you can actually buy that game currency directly through that system. And if you run out of your in-game currency and you're pulling and pulling and pulling, and then you can't anymore, you don't have any more of the game, and you've squeezed every single optional, available bonus that you can out of the game, however you can get it through a variety of different things. They encourage you to continue engaging, of course, by offering that stuff as a reward as you complete certain objectives. You play this, you put money in and pull until you get that character. And if you lose your 50-50 with the money, now you're screwed. But that 50-50 aspect, where Now it's only the special character in there. We'll carry through to the next banner if you're okay with that. So whoever the next character is, next time you win, you're guaranteed to get that character. But if you're pulling for this character and your heart was set on it, you're gonna put more money in till you get it. And then they have their own weapon, which uses its own banner. And you go through the process again. That's how they gotcha. Right? Okay. So that is the standard consumer aspect. You know, someone like me who I don't really care too much, I'll put some money in. And over the years, similar to um, how much I've spent on Stellaris, for example, and the way they do money, they add value to the game. I spent a couple $100 on Genshin Impact. Not a lot, $200, $300, something like that. Over the many, many years I played, that's still like less than $1 an hour. It's not a bad deal, really, for me when I think about it. And I didn't have to pay any money at all if I didn't want any of these special characters, okay? I don't feel particularly burned by that, though. But there are people who will basically pay the money so that their roster is complete. I have to have a copy of every character. And then others that'll be like, I have to have a copy of every character and all their special weapons. Now, another thing that happens in the game is if you get a duplicate of a character, what happens is you don't get a second copy of that character. That's useless to you. What happens is it superimposes on top of that character. And what happens is it opens up an ability, something different, additional that the character gets to do. Makes them more powerful. So some players get obsessed with a particular character because there's maybe something wrong with them. Perhaps that's possible. Or they're healthily just, I want to have the most powerful version of this character and I'm willing to spend money and I've got it or whatever. But realistically, in order to get a character all maxed out like that, you're going to be spending $600 to $1,200, right? That's a lot of money for a video game character, especially when you're like me who recognizes that there's something called power creep. And this is the part that I think is the worst part of these games. Is you spend all this money on a character in the 1.0 version of the game. It's the best character that you have, and it's so cool. She's so awesome, and you got all of her special abilities or his abilities. It's usually a her in these games. It is what it is. But you get all the best abilities. You get her best maximized version of her weapon, and she's awesome, man. She is just kicking ass at the beginning of that game. But 6 months or a year later, that character is not doing so hot compared to the other characters. The bosses that come out are much more difficult than they used to be. And your character that you paid all that money for doesn't have all the special weird new abilities that these other new characters have. So in order to continue playing the game at a arguably competitive level, Genshin Impact is not as bad with this because the game itself, the actual campaign world of itself, doesn't really rely on this so much. But games like Zenless Zone Zero, which is the one that I just recently dropped for this very reason, among others, and same with another one that they made, I dropped for the same reason, because it's like, why am I playing this game and even bothering with this stuff and building these characters? Because there's an element of building these characters. I didn't spend a lot of money on Star Rail, the second one, and I didn't spend a lot of money on Zenless before I abandoned it because I realized like they're just kind of punking us, right? Oh, I see what the game is here, fellas. This sucks. You're making a nice game. It's really fun, but you're making it awful for those of us that actually are engaging in building these characters. They don't care about the old players because they realize they're screwing them over, but new players are coming along all the time that haven't been suckered by this, right? So, uh, but on top of that, you have people who really do have problems, right? They have to have every character, and they're spending money like crazy. Now, these kinds of players, the ones that buy multiple copies, effectively buy multiple copies of these characters, are called whales. It's another word for mark. Big fat mark. Okay? This is how they're referred to in the industry. And they are what fund the game. When I asked myself, while I stood atop Dragonspine Mountain in Genshin Impact and saw this beautiful landscape with this visual effect, I'm like, how is this free? That's how. You have people who are either absolutely filthy wealthy, who are just throw money at stuff like it's no big deal. And are like, you know what? I don't care if I spent $12,000 on this game in the last 3 months. I've got all the best, and I can show off to my internet friends or whatever. And that's where they make their money, is people like that. And interestingly enough to say, it's not in America that they're making this money, it's China. There's a lot of people over there with apparently a lot of money to burn or whatever. But that is how they keep this going. And Genshin Impact is pulling in billions of dollars every year, billions, a video game. It is astronomically more popular in terms of how much money they're making, more successful rather, than almost any other video game that has ever existed, ever, by magnitudes. There are some games out there that are like printing money, like the John Madden games. Everybody wants the new roster in football. They charge you $50 or $70 to play it. There's other stuff that you could add onto it. But there's only so many millions of players that play John Madden. 100 million people? Okay, you made $7 billion. You don't sell 100 million copies of John Madden. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. That would be 1 in 4 people in the United States. No, it's not like that. Another one, which I'm also not very familiar with, is Call of Duty. Call of Duty follows another model, pay to win, which is, correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong on this one, but I believe Call of Duty follows this model. Pay to win. I know that, what's the other game? It was another Blizzard title, actually. It was a shooter, and it's not Fortnite. I can't remember the name of that one. Anyway, Overwatch. Overwatch. That's the name of it. It's a fighting game. You have loot boxes. Similar kind of gotcha mechanic, but there's a weapon inside. And that weapon can make you more powerful. Same with Call of Duty. You can buy weapons to make yourself more powerful. The most egregious example I ever saw of this one, though, was a game called RuneScape. Basically, the free version of this game, you start with like a broomstick or something, a wooden sword. I can kill the slime. Awesome. But very quickly you realize that broomstick isn't going to cut it, right? But hey, you can buy Excalibur for $20. Hey, okay, I'll spend $20 or whatever it is. Maybe it's not that much. I'll spend the money to buy Excalibur. Wow, I'm killing the monsters now. I can play this game. But then you go further into the game, and now Excalibur is not doing so hot. You're still getting killed. Hey, the holy armor. It's another $10. So you can buy that. Now I can take it. But the only way you're going to beat this game, unless you're exceptionally good, is to pay for equipment. Those are also microtransactions. And of course, they also do that same thing where you take your dollars, you turn it into currency that does not map in any way to reality, so you don't really realize how much you're spending. Now, a new law in our Wild West United States, where everything is deregulated, recently was pushed down on gotcha games that said, you have to put dollar amounts in here. You have to put a pretty clear explanation that says what the odds are, which I always had to have that. And they also said you have to have a guarantee. That's where the golden ball that runs out of the machine mechanic comes from. You have to have a guarantee. You got to give them something after so much of this activity. And you can't make it crappy like some of the games were like 1 in 10,000 or something. But some of these games are like that. Oh, you have a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting the awesome character. You have to spend like $50 million or whatever to get, I don't know. It's not maybe that bad, but the odds are impossible, more or less, unless you dump hundreds of dollars into these games to get the character, just the character, right? But in the United States, they said you got to say, okay, on average, this is how much money it costs for every pull of the one-armed bandit. It's like 83 cents or something like that. That's actually kind of a lot when you think about it, for when 9 times out of 10 it's just junk. Now, of course, that's not the reality. You get in-game currency, and there's other ways to get this stuff. But if you pay money for this, it's basically 83 cents for every pull. So that means that in order to actually guarantee that you're going to get that character, it's going to cost you about $200. $200 per character. That's the reality. $200 just for one character every 6 weeks. And some people do it so they get all 7 copies or whatever it is they need to make that character as powerful as they possibly can be. It's insane to do this for most people. But some people can't handle it. They get exposed to this and they're like, I got to have the character. Just like I did with League of Legends. Now, League of Legends didn't demand any money. I will say that about League of Legends. They get their money from people. I don't know if they buy the game, but they get skins. They want to look really cool. They don't want to look like the standard thing, so they get the like Christmas skin and the I look like a dark vampire skin or whatever, and that's how they kind of make themselves look cool. And for League of Legends makes a killing, absolute killing. Plus, it's got a whole online league play app thing. People train. They go to camp. They were teaching this in college when my daughter went to school. That was a literal, like, you would go to the gym to learn taekwondo, you could go to the gaming area and learn how to play League of Legends with semi-professional people trying to see if they can't cut it in the pros. It's a wild world, I'll tell you. That did not exist. There's an old Far Side comic where the parents were looking at the kid playing the Nintendo, and then their bubble, it's like, stop the Goombas, $90,000, save the princess, $120,000 per year, whatever, like they put it because it was a joke. You're not developing skills. Oh, I'm afraid you did. We're, we're doing that. I will tell you, my skills with the Nintendo informed my ability to work with computers. I'm not joking about that either. So there was some merit to that, but you can actually, just like you would do college basketball and hope that you get picked up by the pros, you can do college League of Legends and hope you get picked up by the pros. It's wild. But on the flip side, the way video games are making money now is to see how good they can slip that IV into your veins and get your blood out one drop at a time. And they're very good at it. When I worked at Humongous Entertainment back in the 90s, it was founded by 2 people, Shelley Day, who went to jail for fraud after I'd left there. She was scammed the bank into telling them that I have a secret deal with Sony, but I can't tell you. Please lend me millions of dollars to buy a house on Lake Washington. And they gave it to her. They gave it to her. And they kept trying to ask for that. I think she might have defaulted on the loan. Like, what about that deal? And it's like, oh, it's still in the works. So they finally call Sony. Do you know Shelley Day? No. Banks will come after you for that, boy. I don't know how long she served, but it was a while. Uh, but the other person that founded that studio was Ron Gilbert. Ron Gilbert was actually very instrumental to gaming development in the early 90s and late 80s. He made a game called Maniac Mansion, and he had learned under Roberta Williams, who founded Sierra Online. And one of the things that they taught, or they learned and started to perfect, was the pleasure reward um, system in our brain to play video games to encourage you to continue playing. Again, not a bad thing. And one of his philosophies, which I thought was really cool, was you don't punish the player too hard. Don't punish them too hard for making a mistake. Okay. And we see that in ways like, when you get hit by the monster, you go, ugh, and your guy flashes a little bit and his little heart goes down, whatever. Um, in the adventure games they made, you couldn't get killed. You actually couldn't die in those games. What would happen is you would press the wrong button. There are 3 buttons, a green, a blue, and a red one, and you learn some clue that says you should press the red one, but you press the blue one, and the trapdoor will open, and you fall and hit in your ass. Oh, your guy gets up, dusts himself off. Well, now you're in a pit. You turn around. There's a ladder you can climb back up, and then come back and start over, right, and try again. So this gives you a disincentive to make a mistake, but it's not so bad, right? But also what he talked about was the auditory, in particular auditory stuff, but he had visual stuff was another one. And there's a pacing to this stuff. So I'm going to give you a very simple example of how this would work. You have a gate that has a guard. And there are 2 keys and a password. You have to tell the guard a password, and you have to get 2 keys to unlock the gate. So as you go through the adventure, I don't know, you dig around in the garbage can and you find one of the keys and you get a little auditory cue. Something that tells you, hey, you found something that was good. You needed that. Cool. Okay, got it in my pocket. And you move along and you find that other key is up high, but I can't reach it. And there's a mouse here. And you go up to the mouse and you talk to the mouse says, "Oh, I'm really hungry, man. I'm really hungry. If I could if I could eat some food, I'd have enough strength to climb the wall and cut that string that's holding that key up there for you." So you got to go find the cheese. You bring the cheese to the mouse. The mouse goes, right? Little sound. Cuts the thing. But ding, you get the key. That's the second key. All right, now I go up to the guard. "No, you can't pass unless unless you have the password." "Well, you don't know the password." Okay. So you wander around. You talk to the mouse. "I don't know the password." You go look in the rubbish bin. You can't find the password there. But through some other thing that you look through, maybe you talk to you find a book, right? Book. "Oh, the password is horse." You wander over to the guard. "Horse," you say to him. He goes, "Ha, welcome. You're welcome to pass." So you get another feedback. "Ha, Then you walk up to the gate and you put the key in to click. You put the second key in to click. Ka-chung! And then it'll give you some sound, right? Dun, 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 dun. You are on to the next level. This kind of progressive feedback, and then it drops down again. So you start again. There's some other equivalent of find the key, ding, ding, right, on the next level that continues to give you a clue as to how well you're doing and that you're making progress in the game. And they got very good at this stuff throughout the many decades that video games have become popular. And they are using it to keep people engaged in making money in this cow clicker kind of way, because we don't, especially when they obfuscate the actual dollar amount from the kind of transactions you're doing inside the game, because you don't connect it, you are thinking this is fake money, kind of like how casinos have chips of different colors. You don't really value it the same way. Person will lose $10 on the street, they'll be really upset, but they put $10 on a game of blackjack and it gets taken away in less than 10 seconds, and they don't mind for this very reason, even though they could use that $10 to buy a meal maybe anymore at the fast food place. Um, and it's ruined the industry, in my opinion. Okay, because I'm going to tell you, Grand Theft Auto 5 came out in 2012. The first Grand Theft Auto, which I played, came out in 1998, I believe. So 14 years between the span of time when the first Grand Theft Auto came out, the 5 in the regular series, and the 2 other spin-offs or whatever it is. So we'll just call it 6 games just to be fair. So I'm not sure exactly how many of those spin-offs they made, but I know of one. Now, it's this very silly game. It's very violent. We all have our feelings about it. I really enjoyed um, uh, on Grand Theft Auto 5, the single player mission. Kind of spoke to me because it's about an older gentleman who's kind of a washed out guy, criminal, who's trying to reclaim his life, right? It's part of it. There are a couple other characters. But there's an online game that was actually really cool because you could play as a character you make yourself and give it a name and everything. And the kind of the thing is he's flying into town and lands, and he meets his friend Lamar, who is kind of pushes you into the world. Grand Theft Auto is a very large map that looks like Los Angeles. It's like a miniature version of Los Angeles, and it's kind of funny because when I watch movies and stuff, because I'm not from LA or anything, but when I watch movies about LA, I'm like, "Oh, I know that bridge," and "Oh, hey, I have an office in that big old tower," because I do. I play that game very differently than most players. Most players are rightly stereotyped. If you turn your mic on to all when you listen to these lobbies, oh my god, I will tell you one thing: they are very inventive with the "your mom" jokes. Oh, they are savage kids to one another, right? But I don't play the game the way those guys mostly do. They just want to blow each other up. They want to commit the crimes, maybe go on missions, whatever, race. I treat it as a real estate game. There's all sorts of criminal businesses you can build and max out and all that other stuff. And so I am very nondescript in how I play that game, and I play with other players, and I've had made some online friends with this game, and every now and again they're like, "Hey, show me what you got." Holy smokes! Let me show you my garage. All these fancy cars. That's really the end game of that game, is you buy cars. But the thing is that Grand Theft Auto 5 came out 14 years ago now, as long, if not longer, than the first installation of that game through all the many titles they made. Skyrim came out around the same time, which was the Elder Scrolls V. Same story. Fifth installation of that game. Maybe it was four. No, it was five. Yes, it was five. They have not made a version of either of those games since, because they made an online version for Elder Scrolls, which is subpar, and Grand Theft Auto Online, they started charging money to players who wouldn't do what I did, that didn't treat it like a real estate business. They thought it was tedious. I enjoyed it. I'm just that kind of grinder, I guess. Because I never found a reason to even consider buying money in the game for the game. You know, you can buy $1,000,000 for $10. So you can make that in 30 minutes if you put in the effort to be that efficient, right? But because this is a cash cow, why bother? Every year they talk about Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming out next year. I've heard that for 5 or 6 years now, and it's has no indication that it's actually going to come. Every now and again, there's a news article. Oh, it's coming. Let's talk about it. It's going to be amazing. And eventually it'll come out, and it's probably going to be a steaming pile, just like Cyberpunk was, because it was the same kind of hype. Because they're not making games like that anymore. That's the reality. They are milking everything they can from existing properties and not actually developing anything new. And the games that are actually coming out that are winning awards and stuff are following the old model of selling you a complete product. Hades came out in 2020, I think, 2021, maybe no, it was 2020. They won every award for that game. It wasn't anything major. It was like Diablo. It was like a game from the 90s. It just had good graphics and sound. It was fun. It was a lot of fun, that game. Not original, but it was nice that you didn't have to pay for a bunch of extra stuff. And the game of the decade almost certainly is going to be Baldur's Gate 3, which again went back to the old model of selling you a complete game. They updated it a little bit, but you never had to pay any money for any of those updates, where they just added quality of life and features. And plus, for games like that, there's mods and stuff. So a lot of times I've talked to players and they're like, I'm playing Minecraft. Minecraft came out in 2009. That's 17 years ago. The amount of time that has crossed since Minecraft came out, those kids that were born when that came out are going to be adults soon. It is a stagnant industry right now with a handful of winners. And Baldur's Gate 3 was, all it did was follow the way they used to make games back in the 90s. Because everybody's trying to do what Genshin Impact managed to accomplish, but as cheaply as they can. So we won't see an improvement in this field until enough people who are starting to get it. And it's true of a lot of this stuff that has happened in the last 15 years or so, ever since Facebook became a thing. When I think about this, Facebook and Twitter have been a blight on us. It's people are getting poked in their brain, and they're engaging, but eventually they gain a tolerance for it, and a immune system starts to build up, and they're like, hey, you're messing with me. I don't like that. I don't want to do this. I don't want to engage. And that's what's happening in the gaming industry right now. Blizzard, that grand success for all that money they made for World of Warcraft that hooked my friend in, collapsed. I think it was 2 years ago. It might have been last year, because they weren't making new games. And the games they did make, the new games they did make, were crap. Absolute crap. They were a meme by the time that company burned to the ground, and Microsoft bought them for pennies on the dollar. And they're probably going to screw that even worse up. Ubisoft, which has made a whole bunch of other very popular games, particularly Assassin's Creed, was the crown jewel, which they've absolutely destroyed. They were fun games originally, and they just remade them or whatever. They're on the ropes too. They're probably going to go bankrupt. They're firing people left and right. And what they're trying to do to fix this, to bridge the gap, is they're trying to pour AI into everything. Because that's the solution to everything. Fire everyone and put AI at it. You know, AI is not going to create a good game. It's certainly not going to create a Baldur's Gate where they just went back to the basics. Nintendo, after many, many years, released a new version of Zelda. This was probably 2 years ago. And when people started picking it apart, they found all the old assets from the previous game. They didn't create a new game, they just reskinned the old one. And yet they're expecting you to pay $70 or whatever for these games. The ones that are ostensibly single player, that will probably have things that you can add on for $5 or $10 or whatever they can nickel and dime you with. It's out of control. But gamification in general, you have to watch out for because it appears in so many other places. The most famous one I would say is Robinhood. Robinhood, if you've ever used it, which I've downloaded and played with it just to see what people were talking about, is an investment product. It's how you can buy stocks and bonds and mutual funds and cryptocurrency now, and stock options, which is straight up gambling that most people should not be engaging themselves in. Part of this is because the economy is so crappy that everyone believes that the only way to actually get ahead is if they bet big on some cryptocurrency or some goofy stock that is going to somehow shoot through the roof, like GameStop or Bitcoin or Dogecoin or whatever. But for every one of those, there's a money eating machine that just will take that money. So, to encourage you to spend, because just like the casino, the longer you spend engaging with this app, the more money everybody makes except you. They put all this haptic feedback in there. You get little things. Ba-bang, you bought a stock. Da-ding, you sold a stock. Da-da-da-da, you lost a bunch of money. There went rent. You know, that's happening. And kids just, they play Robin Hood just like they would play Candy Crush. And it's appeared all over in all sorts of places that you wouldn't expect it. And it's a blight. They have made a video game out of all these things that you really shouldn't be making a video game out of. Because at the end of the day, games are ways to learn or have fun with no stakes. Nothing happens to me if I get blown up by the dragon at the end of Baldur's Gate 3 or whatever it is. You know, it's not a dragon. I know that. But something does happen to me if I put $30,000 into reddit.com, the stock option that bets that it's going to go up big on earnings tomorrow, and they report like they did recently and they did not beat earnings, and suddenly all that money gets vaporized into thin air. Uh-oh. Try again. Put another quarter into the one-armed bandit. That's your livelihood going in there, right? And it's no better than a casino. And you know what? I would say this: a casino, at least you know what the odds are, you know. But just like going to Las Vegas, where you see fountains of water just spewing off into the sky in the middle of the Mojave Desert in 120-degree weather with zero humidity. The decadence of it all, you can go to New York City and see the same stuff. These banks make money off of you. And they're doing the same thing to video games and to a lot of other stuff. Rent is the most recent one. Hey, sign into this app to pay your rent. Look at all the rewards you get. So be wary. They're trying to mess with your mind, as always. Everything gets a little worse. But if you're aware of it, you can be resilient to it. Even if you're not like me, where, you know, I hate to lose money in the casino. I'll play. I go in there expecting to lose money because I have a fun time playing blackjack. I don't bet big. I don't go in there thinking I'm going to win every hand. I don't swear at the dealer. I tip because it's fun. I play a game like Genshin Impact and I'll pay a couple $100 over the course of a few years. I don't mind that. I don't mind supporting the cause to pay for my way to enjoying this wonderful game. Just don't get trapped by the video game that they're trying to turn our lives into, because the winner is not going to be you.